Sanctions have been imposed on 82 individuals and 29 companies. German payment provider Wirecard went bankrupt on Tuesday.
Russia has launched an unprecedented disinformation campaign against...
Billions of dollars have been found in various offshore accounts.
Welcome to Integrity Insights, the Berlin Risk Podcast. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Integrity Insights. This time I sat down with Karen Nershi, an assistant professor at IE University in Madrid. Karen has recently published some research into ransomware groups and specifically their links to the Russian government. This is a topic highly relevant for all financial crime professionals and is also related to our recent publication, which I'll make sure to link in this podcast. I think Karen has uncovered really some fascinating details that had not previously been known, and she has a lot to share, so let's jump straight into our conversation. Hi Karen, welcome on the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Right, so can we start with a brief introduction? Can you tell us a little bit about your career, history, or background?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Karen Nershi. I'm an assistant professor at IE University, which is in Madrid. And my background or my research is in political science. And generally, I look at questions that pose international cooperation and security challenges emerging from new technologies. So in the past, I've researched countries' enforcement of anti-money laundering laws in the cryptocurrency sector. And more recently, I did this project, a big project related to ransomware groups and trying to assess to what degree some of the attacks may be politically motivated. So this is generally the area of research that I'm interested in.
Very nice. And your research on ransomware, it's also the reason why I invited you on the podcast, because I've been working recently on an article myself about ransomware attacks, and I came across your study, which I found really super interesting. And so I'm really grateful that you could join me here today. The study is titled Assessing the Political Motivations Behind Ransomware Attacks that you published in July 2023, so it's relatively recent. Do you think you could maybe try to kind of briefly summarize the main findings of the study and maybe tell us a little bit about like the context in which you undertook this study?
Yeah, of course. So when I was starting my postdoc at the Stanford Internet Observatory, I was interested in looking at this topic of ransomware, and generally it's been thought of as a form of crime, at least especially in the past, we're told that it's cybercrime, but there are some developments that suggest that there may be political aspects behind some of the attacks. So that's what I was interested in studying, whether or not we can find any kind of proof of political connections between some of the groups and the types of attacks that they're carrying out. So we collected a data set. We created a data set of over 4,000 victims of ransomware attacks, which are companies, occasionally government organizations, but no individuals are included in this victim data set. And we primarily collected the data set by going to sites on the dark web, where some of these groups post about their victims as part of the extortion process. These particular type of attacks are called double extortion attacks. So we collected this data set over a period of about 6 months, or actually, sorry, I think more like 4 months, maybe, not positive. But so we have this data set, and then what we look at is differences in the timing of attacks between different types of ransomware groups. And what we find ultimately is that there is an increase in the number of ransomware attacks before elections in several major democratic countries, including the US and Germany and a couple of other countries. So there's an increase by these groups that have core members operating from Russia, but there's no similar increase in the number of attacks by other groups where we don't know that they have any particular connection to Russia. So that's really the main finding. We do also do some other tests as well. And we also analyze a set of leaked chat logs from one of the major ransomware groups called Conti. And that provides some insight into how the group is structured, how it functions. We find evidence of some conversations between the group's top members and parts of the Russian government, like the FSB, the security services. So that's a bit of a high-level overview, but I'm happy to jump into any part of this that might be interesting.
I mean, maybe my first question is: was your intention always to look at links between these groups and Russia specifically, or did it just kind of like looking at the groups and the prevalence of their links to Russia kind of present itself this option kind of?
Yeah, so it's more of the second point. So I was interested in studying this topic, and I ended up doing a lot of research looking at cybersecurity blogs, learning more about the space, how the attacks are carried out, and the dynamics of all of this. And so it just sort of turned out after studying this that many of the groups were operating from Eastern Europe, from Russia, and so they were kind of in the space geographically. So there are also some ransomware attacks by other groups, by those in Iran, and North Korea has carried out some ransomware attacks. But just based on the data that we collected, the vast majority of them seem to fall into either groups that were somewhat connected to Russia or groups that we couldn't ascertain what connections they might have, if any. So it was more of a feature of what we saw in the ransomware space. Of course, other states are also engaging in cybercrime, sometimes in different aspects of cybercrime. But yeah, it's just really what we saw out there in the data.
I mean, what I found really fascinating was that you kind of, I mean, I don't know if you would say that you kind of conclusively prove the connection between those groups and the Russian government, or like at least showed a very strong kind of plausible connection, which I had never seen like that anywhere else. I mean, there's a lot of like media speculations about these connections, but from what I've seen, from my research, I haven't really seen anyone else kind of providing this kind of like detailed of evidence on this.
Yeah, so we're a bit careful in saying that our data is consistent with a model where there may be these types of connections. So besides the evidence that we find in these chat logs where there are direct communications between this one particular group's leaders and the Russian government, we can't really, it's not evidence of a direct connection, but it's evidence that suggests that there is some type of cooperation or collaboration that happens, which we suspect is not super institutionalized by any means. So our analysis of the chat logs show that they seem to be independent criminal groups. So they're not just like a division of the Russian government or the Russian cyber forces. But yeah, the evidence that we find suggests to us, and we think it supports the conclusion that there's this sort of loose collaborative relationship between the Russian government and some of these cybercriminal ransomware groups.
And another interesting point is that, I mean, you even mentioned now Eastern Europe and then Russia, but there is reading your paper, you kind of talk about how there's a clear, very important distinction between countries like, for instance, Ukraine and Russia, especially when it comes to the countries like relevant authorities cooperating with the Western authorities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So in general, Western law enforcement, including the US, including Interpol, Europol, all of these law enforcement services have gotten a lot better over the last 5 years and even within the last few years at really identifying some of the criminal actors behind these cyber criminal operations and in many cases arresting them. So we see this happen in Western countries. Some of these major cyber criminals have been arrested, but one of the big problems for the West is that the Russian government has generally provided safe harbor to cyber criminal actors operating within the country, and especially these ransomware groups. So even across Eastern European countries that may not have such active police forces themselves looking for these cybercriminals, we've seen cases of cooperation between the governments in Poland and the Ukraine with these law enforcement organizations to arrest some ransomware operators and other criminal actors. Whereas Russia has really, for the most part, or has refused to cooperate with Western law enforcement. So, and this is something that I think a lot of people have talked about anecdotally in the field for a long time. So you have cases where the US government might talk to their Russian counterparts and notify them about cyber criminals that they think are operating within the country. And then, notably, the Russian authorities are not arresting them. But also sometimes there are definitely stories that they are recruiting these people to help Russian government do certain activities, or they're sort of holding things over their head to try to influence these actors. Because anecdotally and from these stories in the field, it seems like the Russian government is using this information to identify some of the really skilled hackers and cyber actors in the space. So what makes Russia unique from other countries, from most other countries, is the fact that they've really provided this safe harbor and they've first of all refused to cooperate with Western law enforcement agencies. For the most part, they haven't arrested these actors either on their own.
And another key finding in your study is that the amount of ransomware attacks on Western companies and institutions decreased significantly following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And you argue that this is due to the fact that many of those actors have been conscripted by the Russian government to advance their kind of cyber operations, so that they don't have the time to for their own commercial activities. Can you elaborate a little bit on this point?
Yeah, so this is really from a few reports that I've seen. One of them put out by Google, I think, that is getting more direct information about what's been happening, especially since the invasion. They've been following that. So there have definitely been a few reports anyway that members of the Conti gang were recruited to help the Russian cyber forces carry out attacks against Ukraine. There are also a few tools from two ransomware groups, Conti and another one, Cuba, that were part of their malware arsenal for criminal activities that have been repurposed to carry out Russian government cyber attacks against Ukraine. So this is another part of the paper that we're hypothesizing about, which is that a benefit for the Russian government of having these cyber criminal groups within their country, allowing them to operate, and the fact that these groups overwhelmingly, almost exclusively target companies and actors outside of Russia, is that by allowing these cyber criminal groups to function, the government can then draw on these actors that are skilled, that are cyber hackers and have experience here, and recruit them for government activities if they need the additional support. So that's really what we're hypothesizing has happened, and there's some evidence to suggest that did happen, at least to some degree, after the invasion.
It's fascinating, and I mean, I don't know if you've actually conducted any additional work on this, but how likely do you think it is that other governments, besides Russia, employ like similar type of techniques?
Yeah, so I do have a couple of ongoing projects stemming from this, but I think we've seen the Iranian government appears to have sometimes collaborated with cyber criminal groups. North Korea has engaged in lots of cyber thefts and to some degree ransomware as well, although they don't really, as far as I've seen, don't really seem to be in this double extortion space. So I would say that a lot of these rogue countries are engaging in cybercrime and have for some time, although the particular activities that they're doing can vary.
And another very interesting aspect, at least from our perspective of this whole topic, is the the way different authorities, Western governments or organizations are dealing with this. We see that in the United States, they have a very sanctions-heavy approach whereby they have been sanctioning a lot of groups, individuals related to or linked to those attacks. How effective do you think this approach is?
It's a great question. I think in the past we have seen the U.S. Treasury actually sanction a couple of ransomware groups themselves. That seemed to be a really ineffective method of trying to address this problem, because in response, you see just some rebranding of the groups. They pop up as new groups with a different name. And in some cases, you even had groups telling their victims, we're not the sanctioned group. Like, don't worry, we're not sanctioned. So that has been an approach. We also see sanctioning of individuals. Of course, there's been a lot of that since the invasion. Based on my research and some of my prior research into anti-money laundering regulation within the cryptocurrency sector, I think that the main point at which governments can really manage to address this problem through regulation will be through the anti-money laundering regulation within cryptocurrency exchanges, because this is the point at which they're converting cryptocurrency to fiat currency so they can use it more widely. So there are some regulations that a lot of countries, FATF countries, OECD countries have adopted in the cryptocurrency space. So I think by strengthening those regulations and trying to improve that, that's really the avenue that's going to prove most effective, in my opinion, for addressing this challenge.
Mm. And speaking of cryptocurrency, that's another interesting subject, because basically now the companies that are affected, that are by ransomware attacks, they not only have to worry about this whole issue of obviously having their data potentially exposed, but also they have to worry about sanctions or potential sanction violation if they make those ransomware payments. And I wonder how do you deal with this as a company? Because obviously I assume that these groups, they don't formally introduce themselves when they attack you, so you don't know who you actually are sending the cryptocurrency to. So how to deal with that?
Yes. Yeah, so you definitely won't know the individuals, although the groups themselves generally are promoting their name and their reputation as these criminal actors. I think, as far as I know, based on the last time I looked at it, we don't really have we don't have laws nationally within countries forbidding companies from paying these groups, these ransomware actors. So I think we do see an increase in reporting requirements, especially at least within the United States, that if you do pay a ransom to these actors, you need to report it to government agencies. And then for some public companies, they also need to disclose that there's been some sort of cyber breach. But for the whole, on the whole, I don't think that these, well, I guess I can't say because I don't know exactly what's going on in the calculus in these companies, but at least some of them don't seem so worried about potential sanction violations when they ultimately end up paying the ransom.
I mean, it's also what you just mentioned, the potential forbidding of making these ransomware payments. I mean, when I was doing my research, I saw that most governments in the UK or the German government, they strongly discourage companies from making those payments, but they don't actually forbid them to do so. And I read about, there was in November 2023, there was the White House in Washington hosted an annual international counter-ransomware initiative summit, and one of the kind of main outcomes was that the delegates then expressed their kind of collecting stance against ransom payments. So there was clearly like a will expressed that this is something that should be banned on a global level. But like, how likely do you think this this is, that the payments will actually be banned?
I honestly, I don't see a ban on payments actually working. So, of course, if there was a way to get all these companies in all these countries to stop paying ransoms, then this type of crime would no longer be valuable, and probably these groups would switch to doing something else, some other type of cybercrime. So, a big concern here is that there are really large sums of money going to these criminal actors, which is, of course, dangerous and a really bad outcome here. But I think just based on some of these cases, you see occasionally, sometimes there are attacks against hospitals. Sometimes you have actually people's lives sort of hanging in the balance as they're waiting for machines and systems to come back online. So I think at this point, given how widespread the problem is across many sectors, across these developed countries, I think trying to get this ban in place at this point would probably prove too difficult. So in my opinion, I feel like the best way for countries to work on this or to regulate this is through the cryptocurrency exchanges.
And maybe the last questions regarding crypto, because as you mentioned, you do also a lot of work on anti-money laundering and crypto. How do you see that all these issues, ransomware, crypto, money laundering, how does it all come together?
Yeah, so I came at this, as we were chatting about a little bit earlier, through my interest in anti-money laundering enforcement. And then I looked at the introduction of these laws within the cryptocurrency sector, which is very interesting. And actually, when I started looking at the ransomware project, I thought I might be looking at, say, like cryptocurrency payments to the groups. But then it just turned out that looking at the victims provided this clearer path. But yeah, cryptocurrency on the whole has really provided an avenue for a lot of these, for the payments related to these crimes. So actually, what people think is the first ransomware attack happened in 1989. And there was this researcher that shared floppy disks with a malware virus on it. And the instructions told people to send a traveler's check to a post office box in Panama. So you can have ransomware attacks without cryptocurrency, but it's just enabled it on a much, much larger scale. And the fact that it's digital and pseudo-anonymous has given these threat actors a way in. So yes, I think that cryptocurrency has played a really important role, of course, in this ecosystem of cybercrime by really functioning as the main form of payment. And so I think as countries, and especially Western countries, get better at really regulating the sector, regulating where it touches the traditional economy, where it's connected to fiat currencies, that will hopefully really help to, over time, make some of these crimes less profitable and hopefully lead to a decrease in these crimes over time.
Hopefully. Karen, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It was great being here. Bye.